All right, good evening. Welcome to the Greater Albany Public Schools Board of Director meeting. I will call the meeting to order on Monday, June 28th at 7:02 p.m. If you will all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Slow moving, I know. Okay. Let's see. Sorry guys, I forgot to lead in board book. Oh, it's not letting me lead. Just kidding. Okay. So we have the budget hearing. As per ORS 294453, the governing body must hold a budget hearing on the date specified in the public notice to receive citizens' testimony on the budget. And I understand there was...
So this is a little bit complicated.
Okay.
But, what happened was we've made some adjustments to the budget that we're going to be bringing to you in a lot more detail as part of new business. But because those changes were more significant than they would be in a normal year, we needed to do a second public hearing to have a second opportunity for people to speak on the budget. This meets that requirement, and then we'll go through the budget in more detail when we get to the new business.
Okay. And we did not have any
No.
comments from the public. Okay. So no recommended actions at this point. We'll do that later.
I believe, Madam Chair, procedurally, you would open it, verify with the secretary that there's no public comment.
Okay.
And then close the hearing.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and open the budget hearing. And then, do we have any comments? None?
Comments?
Okay, so then we will adjourn the budget hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep. All right, we are going into comments from the public. I'm hearing like other people outside. Other people outside, probably. Okay, so we are going to rotate through our public comments again. All public comments received by noon on the day of the board meeting are read, and they are put into public comment the order they're received. And we will go ahead and get started. You want to read the first one? Sure.
Sure. How many would you like me to do?
You can do a couple pages.
Okay. All right, public comment number 1 from Tom Cordier. I see no reason for this June 7th school board meeting, 6 to 9 p.m. to only be a virtual meeting. I am CDC compliant and have been for 60 days. The decision to exclude in-person attendance is not based on current guidance and appears to be self-serving. I shall be there in person and expect to be admitted and speak under agenda item D. Tom Cordier. Public comment number 2, Diana Hammond. I am writing tonight once again in full support of our district administration. Melissa Goff and Lisa Harlan do amazing work around equity and diversity, listening to and advocating for all families, especially those who often do not have a voice in our community. You have stood up for those who are marginalized and continue to stand for the needs of those who are going through trauma caused by racism, homophobia, xenophobia, and all forms of hate. I am honored that my daughters, who are bicultural, biracial, attend a school district with 2 caring, confident, and passionate women at the forefront, who are tirelessly advocating and honoring diversity. I am also writing to ask that Eric Aganaga resign from his position on the school board. You, Eric, have not been truthful to our community and do not honorably represent our community of color. You have gone against school board policies and ethics, and that cannot and will not be tolerated. Thank you for your time, Diana Hammond. Public comment number 3, Melanie Johnson. Hello, I wanted to let you know that while my son was very pleased to see that the district was finally soliciting student opinions about the high school schedules, he was dismayed once he had started the survey. He was completely unable to accurately record his interest and strongly suspects that others had the same problem. The survey had many sections, each of which had a very limited number of courses, and the students had to pick at least one choice in each section. but were only allowed a maximum of 3 in the AP course section. When I asked about the limited section, I was told that the courses listed were the ones offered at only one school. However, that did not reflect the course catalog of the South and West websites. I was told the catalogs would be reviewed and the survey would be fixed, but it was not fixed by the time my son had to have the survey done. In any case, there's no reason to believe that every student wants to take at least one, but less than 3 classes at any one section, especially with so many classes not listed. Because of this, many students will have done what my son was forced to do and select fewer classes in some sections than they really want, and select courses they have no interest in for the other sections, just to be allowed to turn in the survey. Given the poor design of the survey, I can't see how it would be possible to glean useful information from the course choices. While responses to the final question may be valid, responses to the course section questions are fundamentally flawed and should be considered in that light. Sincerely, Melanie Johnson. Public comment number 4, Melissa Murphy. As the parent of a memorial student, I couldn't be more impressed and grateful for all the diligent and caring work of Superintendent Goff, all the teachers, and especially the staff of Memorial Middle School. Navigating the confusing, stressful, and scary requirements of the pandemic was no easy task, and they've done an amazing job with what they had available. The pandemic showed the obvious need for better diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, and that it's time for GAPS in Albany to accept change. I am deeply concerned at the politicizing of our school board race and the constant public negativity thrown at our GAPS leaders and staff. I'm looking to this school board to set an example for our children that we care about all of them and their safe, honest, and equal right to education. You have a choice to lift Albany up to meet these important challenges by working together and making our school, our city, and our schools a leader in the state, or continue to fight against the inevitable and needed change and keep Albany from being a city that attracts families, emerging industries, and talent. I believe this board can do the hard work to meet all the needs of students. Let's be an example to others. Thank you. You want to go?
Public comment number 5 was from Danae Newton to all current and new board members. I have attached a letter that I wrote to the publisher regarding the op-ed from the editorial board. To the new school board members, you'll be tasked with answering to more than just the community who has the most influence and privilege. Respectfully, many of us are going to ensure that you're reminded of it. I ask that you practice humility as you learn how challenging it is to lead a district, and especially a district as unique as Albany. I challenge you to acknowledge that because you are now a board that is entirely male and/or white and privileged, you may not fully understand the weight with which our diverse community members have to navigate this town and its schools. To Mr. Wilson, I want to ask you, please allow yourself the training to be able to speak to equity. Please work with GAP's equity director and the ESD to look at the data. And really, this is for all 3 of you, from diversity of enrollment in AP coursework to expulsions and suspensions. What does the data say about our schools and our district? We will keep asking all of you to tell us what you've learned about equity in our schools and to be advocates for it. I've learned a few things from being in the trenches of education all this time. You will do nothing for students but hurt them by refusing to listen and learn and understand. Seek to understand and, of course, hold true to your beliefs, but I plead with you, be open to changing those beliefs when you learn that those beliefs were wrong. One of those beliefs we all know you have is your perceptions of superintendent and assistant superintendent. As a person who was hired by Superintendent Goff in Philomath, who worked with her there on strategic planning and firsthand observed her put students first and lead with integrity, you have misperceptions that you need to reconcile. And as a person who has worked with Assistant Superintendent Harlan on the regional racial equity work, they are driven by their genuine care for students, and their lens allows them to lift up our most marginalized students, and that only helps all of our students. Please read the letter I wrote to the DH publishers, and please, if you truly sit in these seats because you want what's best for every Albany student, listen to your district leadership. They will never be able to be perfect, but they are doing the work that our schools need. Thank you. Public comment number 6 from June Hemmingson. Although not a parent, I certainly back attempts by the school district to allow and promote efforts to strengthen efforts to teach and deal with diversity and inclusion issues in our schools, and hope that you will have a positive attitude towards these efforts. Thank you for being willing to serve our community. June Hermingson, 50-plus year resident of Albany. Public comment number 7 is from Heidi Scoville. I am writing today in support of Superintendent Melissa Goff and the continuation of the equity, diversity, and inclusion work she has facilitated. I am a lifelong resident of Lynn County, a graduate of South Albany High School, and a parent of children enrolled in the district. In recent years, I have discovered that not all students have been supported and included. The voices most likely to be heard are those of adults with resources and voting power, rather than the vulnerable students in need of equitable environments. As our city becomes increasingly diverse, we have a growing need for our community members to work together and advocate for all students, not just the loudest or well-funded majority voices. I firmly believe that working towards equity, diversity, and inclusion within our educational system benefits all of us, but it is also the right thing to do. Let's make a difference in the lives of vulnerable students who are counting on our willingness to listen to their needs and help create an environment in which they can thrive. You want to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Public comment number 8, Heather Mariah. Dear school board members, I'm writing in support of equity, diversity, and inclusion within the Greater Albany Public Schools in general, and Superintendent Melissa Goff in particular. Superintendent Goff is a strong advocate for GAP students as well as their families. She has navigated and continues to navigate extraordinary, contentious times and has done so with student success front and center. She is committed to students being more prepared to function competently and compassionately within an increasingly diverse community and workforce. Superintendent Goff's dedication to equity, diversity, and inclusion is reflected in the very students who attend our schools. More students from Asian, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and LGBTQ+ backgrounds attend than ever before. By anyone's measure, that data is irrefutable. My family is honored to have a champion like Melissa Goff out in front of the district. She's leading our schools, our teachers, and our students to meet the pan-cultural reality of today and tomorrow. I thought the board needed reminding that Albany is fortunate to have a leader and educator the caliber of Superintendent Goff, duty-bound to honor and promote the diversity within our community. Sincerely, Heather Mariah. Public comment number 9, Denise Bigner. Dear GAP school board members, I'd like to express my support for the equity, diversity, and inclusion work to continue in the district. I have been following the Parents of GAPS group on Facebook and am regularly disappointed by their efforts to discontinue this work and their overall efforts to take down any leaders doing this work. I want you to know this group does not represent all the parents in the district. In fact, I believe they are in the minority in regard to their views. Our family, including my 2 teenage children, are very grateful for the efforts of the current GAPS leadership team related to issues of equity. Thank you for all you're doing to further this work. Thank you for doing it regardless of the voices that out there that would try to discourage you. Denise Bigner. Public comment number 10, Samantha Shealy. I am writing as a former teacher, a parent, and a community member in support of our Superintendent Melissa Goff and the effort she has made towards creating a more equitable and inclusive Greater Albany Public Schools. As an instructor at GAPS, I saw firsthand the inequities in our school system. Most of our students are not old enough to vote and fully advocate for themselves. Often they must rely on adults and community members to advocate for them. When these advocates collaborate and work towards the safety and inclusion of all students in the entire community, or all students, the entire community is strengthened and reaps the rewards of these benefits. In order for this to occur, we need leaders who will work diligently toward understanding and meeting the needs of every student in our increasingly diverse district. We need leaders who will reach out to the communities within our district that are underrepresented and invite them to the table. We need leaders who make it their personal responsibility to make sure that no child slips through the cracks because their voice was silenced, or because someone refused to advocate on that student's behalf. We are fortunate to have such a leader in Melissa Goff. I hope our school board will continue to support this necessary work. Thank you for your willingness to step forward and volunteer to work towards a district in which all students can reach their full potential. Sincerely, Samantha Shealy.
Public comment number 11 from Deidre Green. I am writing in support of the current GAPS leadership. Melissa Goff has been the most supportive superintendent when it comes to hearing the voices of students of color in the Albany School District. While not perfect, she has listened and been mindful of representing all the Albany students. I stand behind her knowing that she is open to navigating these trying times as we develop a more inclusive posture and change the paradigm of one group of voices being the only voices that are important in our community. Thank you. Public comment number 12 is from Andrea Bartel. Educational equity means that each child receives what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential. As school board directors, you hold that power to progress our community socially and economically by keeping the legacy work of educational equity propelling forward. You have the power to break generational cycles of poverty through educational equity. You have the power to create a community that is flourishing by guaranteeing that every child has what they need to become a participating member of the community. The bridge of equity has been started, and it is unacceptable for any board member to block the completion of this bridge. If you block or destroy this bridge by going back to what was, you will stunt the growth of our community. You will cause trauma to kids and families who fall through the cracks of past educational systems, who are neglected or abused by those systems and the people within them, leaving our whole community socially and economically stunted. The research and statistics are all there to support the bridge building, why and how to construct it, but you have to do the work now to grow your knowledge, not just hold strong to your personal opinion. Everyone's voice must count, and the small set of constituents who have the ear of some board members cannot outweigh the cry of the many to bring Albany together and build bridges of equity. Thank you, Superintendent Goff, the executive team, and the past board directors in starting the construction of this bridge and not giving up on our community when hateful messages cause you pain. Thank you for leading the transparency and integrity, and may this new board not fall short in continuing the legacy work of educational equity you started. Public comment number 13 is from Wendy Anderson. I am writing you in support of the work Superintendent Goff has been tirelessly working towards during her time serving GAPS. I am a community member, a parent of 3 future Albany students, and an educator. My work as a school counselor places me in conversations with students in their most vulnerable moments. In hearing their stories, witnessing their pain and struggle, and being inspired by their persistence, I am convinced equity work to reduce systemic racism is the most powerful change we can make for our children. Melissa Goff sees all of our kids and has shown she is committed to inclusion, equity, and diversity. We need board members to bring Albany together when it comes to what's best for our schools and racial equity. We want everyone's voices to count, not just a small set of constituents who have the ear of some board members.
Public comment number 14, Maria Buttram. I write today as a concerned citizen and member of the Albany Student Advocacy Project. Over the past year and a half, while many leaders have complained about the difficulties of managing organizations during a pandemic and the frequent changes to educational institutions under RSSL, Superintendent Goff has not only gallantly navigated these challenges, she has led GAPS to build a more equitable educational experience for all students. For current board members, I wish to commend you on your support of this work and your vision for a more equitable and inclusive learning community. It would be impossible to build bridges we've seen erected under Ms. Melissa's leadership without your commitment to these ideals. For the recently elected school board members, I have deep concern that your goal is not only to undo the hard work GAPS has done in EDI, but to malign, mischaracterize, defame, and ultimately remove Superintendent Goff from her position based upon the loudest and most wealthy voices you hear. Make no mistake, Melissa Goff is an effective leader, a dedicated educator, and a bridge builder. I will provide an example. In May, a GAPS student was the victim of a racially motivated hate crime at the hands of several other GAPS students. Superintendent Goff didn't politicize this event and attempt to split the GAPS community into factions. Instead, she worried about the impact this tragic event would have on all the students involved. You see, despite their abhorrent actions, Ms. Goff saw the tragedy of the perpetrators learning this hate as much as the pain of the student who was so brutally attacked. I believe that is exactly the sort of leader that the educators of the children of GAPS need and deserve. Superintendent Goff has the courage necessary to face uncomfortable truths we must face to become a better community. I will pray for each of you, Pete, Brad, and Roger, that God bestows that same bravery upon you. As a 6-year resident of Albany with a breadth of life experiences, who chose this place to set down roots, I see that we have a long way to grow. When you are making decisions, I hope you remember that your choices shape the impressionable minds of children and what sort of place they get to grow up in. Whether they are born and raised here or moved here last week, they deserve your best. I hope you call upon your better angels as you navigate your new roles. Public comment number 15, Brad Wilson. I'm writing this letter with the intent that it be read into the record on the June 28th board meeting. For those who are not aware, I am an incoming board member who will take office on July 1st, 2021. The 3 new board members receiving training on July 23rd from OSBA. During that training, the new board members were encouraged to submit any questions we might have regarding the June 28th agenda. The following day, I submitted a 3-page list of questions regarding proposed changes in policies A, B. As of this letter, none have been answered. From talking with other current board members, it appears that the questions that are not liked are not answered. Therefore, I have listed some of these questions here. Number 1, Policy BBF, Board Member Standards of Conduct, paragraph 17. The words "be heard" are struck and replaced with "observe." The proposed policy would now read, 17, respect the right of the public to attend and observe board meetings. This statement would remove the voice of the people from being heard at board meetings. Why was this change made? Please cite the ORS that states the public cannot be heard at a public meeting. Number 2, Policy BF, Policy Development. In this newly proposed policy, the sentence, "The basic responsibility for initiating, reviewing, and recommending new policies or policy modifications will rest with the superintendent." This policy goes on further, making the superintendent the sole choke point for new policies. Further yet, the superintendent develops the policies. While the superintendent may seek parent and community input, no such input is required, yet the final responsibility rests on the board's shoulders. Why was such a blatant shift of power given to the superintendent? Why should the board no longer be the genesis of public policy, school policy, and merely become a stamp of approval? Why should the board be the final authority and responsibility for board policy when it has minimum input on policy development? Please state the ORS that requires the superintendent to initiate board policy. Number 3, Policy BG, Board Staff Communications. The existing policy states it shall be the policy of the board to provide channels communications for the purpose of sharing concerns, exchanging ideas, and resolving non-contractual grievances. Is proposed to be deleted and replaced with new language. This new language states all formal communications or reports to the board or any board committee from staff members shall be submitted through the superintendent. Further, all board members must first get permission to visit any school facility. This is another shift in power away from the board to the superintendent. Why are board members not allowed to visit schools or talk with staff without permission? Is it the intent to limit or restrict communication between staff, administration, and the board? Please state the ORS that restricts the rights of board members to visit schools or requires permission to do so. Is that 3 minutes? Okay. I can go ahead and do it.
It's okay. Actually, at this time, I would like to make a statement that was recommended as I spoke with our attorney and the OSBA in regards to this public comment. As the board chair, and I'm doing this from the perspective of we will not have an opportunity, those of us that are here now, to respond to this concern. This is our last board meeting. So as the board chair, I appreciate the interest of the incoming board members on these matters, but also want to make sure to provide the full context of both the board's process and to approve and adopt policies and the resources available to incoming board members who will be taking on this role for in the next few days. Board member-elect Wilson sent 3 pages, yes, including 17 questions, and as you saw in his comments, many of those with multiple questions, on Thursday midday. On Friday, I began to inquire with OSBA and our attorneys about the appropriate steps for a response. I shared this information with Board Member-elect Wilson earlier today via email and wanted to provide my response to provide this information likewise to community members who may be interested in this process as well. In general, our board works with the Oregon School Board Association, who reviews our policies and makes recommendations for legal compliance. Nearly all of the recommendations of OSBA are approved by the board, given their expertise. It should be noted that the assumptions included in Board Member-elect Wilson's comments about any motivations related to these changes are not accurate. The response that was sent to Board Member-elect Wilson was, I have reached out to OSBA and our attorney to verify a few things and wanted to follow up with you on this request. I respect your request for information and your desire for this policy approval to be moved. The board members work with OSBA to discuss all necessary policy changes. In this case, these policies have been under review by a work group led by OSBA. We have our Vice Chair Thompson as part of that work group, as we have community members and other people from the district, and have been vetted and thoroughly discussed before coming to the board table. We have received these policy updates as a board and have already had an opportunity to ask our questions and make recommendations for changes. This is coming back to our meeting tonight as old business. As such, we will conduct our normal process with the existing board discussion if needed, move to a vote, or move to have it come back again as old business because there are still outstanding questions. Kristen Miles with OSBA has reviewed your questions and agrees with this response. Due to the volume of information you are requesting here, we will not be providing a response to these questions. If you would like to see all of the editing details and reasons for all the changes, you can reach out to Spencer Lewis at OSBA. He is your contact for all policy-related work. I want to speak to one other issue, as this keeps coming up and there seems to be a perception that the board does not want to engage with the public at our public meetings. Having spoken with OSBA and our attorney on this issue as well, we are reminded to ensure that public comment be structured effectively so that the complaint procedures and board policy, collective bargaining agreements, and the superintendent's contract are all adhered to. We have for many years, even before this board's tenure, provided an opportunity for public engagement through our public comment process. We hear public comments. We do not generally engage in discussion. This is mostly due to the fact that this is the board's meeting. We have a lot of agenda items and work to do in these meetings, and it is wise to also have the superintendent study and report back on issues raised in these sessions before the board jumps in to provide an immediate response based on partial information. To further offer community and public engagement, we started conducting public forums throughout the community over the past several years. This is where the board and district staff have and will continue to engage in more in-depth discussion and conversation. Board Policy BDDH, Public Participation in Board Meetings, sets out these considerations and is the best practice that has been established through school boards' collective experiences and recommended by OSBA. You want to take the last one? Thanks.
One further public comment number 16, Susan Leonard. GAPS Board, thank you for this opportunity to express my views. I believe a strong school district is crucial to the health of a community. I am concerned about the future of GAPS as a member of the Albany community. I have read and heard so much vitriol from a loud minority of GAPS parents, but I do not believe that they represent most Albany residents or the students and parents of the district. All school districts in the country were met with unprecedented challenges as they went through this past year of the pandemic. It's easy to second-guess decisions in hindsight, but I believe the GAPS administration made the best decisions they could using the information available at the time. I've heard many complaints that they were not transparent about their decisions, but GAPS school board meetings are generally sparsely attended, so misinformation was spread without checking on the validity of complaints. I ask that the members of the GAPS school board work with the GAPS administration in a collaborative and respectful manner that places the experiences of our students as the highest priority. Yes, I'm talking about all students, but also asking that the board recognizes that meeting the needs of all students requires looking at issues through an equity perspective, not just a one-size-fits-all approach. Having listened to the candidate forums before the election, I know that at least one of our incoming board members stated that he could not define equity, which is very concerning. Times are changing, and we all need to keep up and do everything we can to make the future of Albany a more just and welcoming place for all. And one of the best starting places is in the classroom, where we teach our children. Respectfully, Susan Leonard.
All right, that concludes our comments from the public. And that will move us into our board business. And we have certifying the election results. Election results have been provided by Lynn and Benton counties for the May 18th, 2021 special election. The district must provide a written statement to Lynn and Benton County clerk offices stating that the candidates are qualified to hold office. The Lynn County Clerk Office confirms candidates are registered to vote and live in the current zone of Zone 1 or Zone 2. Candidates Pete Morse, Roger Nyquist, and Brad Wilson meet the requirements by law and policy. There are documents there that show the certification information that I think most of you have had an opportunity to review. And so we will entertain a motion at this time.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the election statement letters to Lynn and Benton counties as presented.
Thank you. Motion on the table to approve the election statement letters to Lynn and Benton County as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? That passes unanimously. And that moves us into our superintendent comments. Superintendent Goff.
Thank you, Chair Butzner. We are going to try a coordinated presentation here between me and Director Tomsky, and we shall see to what success we are able to do this. So if you can move your chairs back, you're going to actually need to kind of view two screens at once. So Chair Butzner, you might even want to, I don't know, have eyes in the back of your head.
Oh, there's two.
Because there's two. So,
Over here.
But wait, there's more.
but wait. So, what we are going to be playing on the left is a compilation of the bond achievements that have come into play under your leadership. And then on the right, with a little music, I think, with the bond presentation, I will be walking through your board service aside from that. Okay, here we go. Ready? All right, there we go. All right, so just a few of your achievements for our community, including our transformational $187 million facilities bond, leading strategic planning throughout the community, the COVID-19 pandemic, safety for students, families, and staff throughout that, prioritizing your choices, our Student Success Act investments, career and technical expansions for middle through high school, groundbreaking board policies for educational equity and to ensure that every student belongs, provision of student voice to shape our future, and elevating marginalized voices within our community. If you'll remember, we started our strategic planning process in fall of 2019 with an introduction to our community, inviting them to engage with us around developing a vision and beginning our strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years. One of the things we prioritized at your leadership was to ensure that all of these engagements were available to our participants in Spanish so that we were inclusive from the outset. Our task was to build a vision, mission, and strategic plan that reflects the priorities of our students, families, and community, and we pulled together a strategic planning team from across community sectors to spearhead that work. When we met with our families out in our schools and in other areas within the community, we asked for their input. We talked to them about the fact that their important work is right now. The investments that they would be making with us would be to help us make sure that we're investing wisely through things such as the Student Success Act in our students' future. And we discussed with them the real dollars that were associated with that for our children. We presented 6 questions to each group, and we did this not only in-person forums, but we did this through small focus groups. We did this through a number of different student surveys and family surveys. And we asked, what work makes you most proud of the district or your local school? What is the one biggest change, improvement, offering, or adjustment that you would suggest we make over the next 5 years? What are some core beliefs do you believe should be represented in the district's strategic work? How can the district better serve all students, including our students of color, our Native American students, students with disabilities, students learning English, and students in poverty? How could we better connect with our diverse stakeholders to increase communication and involvement and help them gain a greater sense of ownership in our public schools? And then the open-ended question of what else would you like to suggest that has not been mentioned so far? From that, we received so much data that we were almost overwhelmed by it and brought that back to the board several times, to our administrative teams, to our school leadership teams. And from that work, developed our mission of building bridges to lifelong learning and brighter futures. But that mission was really based off of the beliefs that we identified. These shared beliefs are very easy to identify when we analyze the data from across our different stakeholder groups. Believing in lifelong learning, respecting individuals and community, instructing at the highest level to really prepare our kids for life beyond school, to design our systems that represent all of our voices, to grow social, emotional, and physical well-being in our schools, to engage multiple perspectives, and to ultimately strengthen relationships through our work. The strategic planning team talked about the why that we do the work and the what of what we're doing. And I'm going to fast forward through this because I just talked to you about that. And really developed our 3 areas of focus, which is to pursue academic excellence through critical thinking and rigorous engagement, to implement equitable systems that represent and value multiple perspectives, and to support student mental, social, and emotional health. And I think we can all say that we are so glad that we did this work the year before the pandemic, because it really underpinned what we were focusing on during all of our actions. The outcomes and strategies that were identified for this work were really a part of what was embedded within the student investment account application for us. So we looked at how would we measure success, and then we also identified what are those strategies that we are going to begin to adopt so that they become practices that are the regular way of doing and knowing. Things such as having everybody analyze and review data, disaggregated data with an equity lens. So we are looking at different student groups to see how we are preparing each of those groups and whether outcomes that we are pursuing are actually being reached. Really looking at creating a culture of safety, not just for our students, but also for the adults within our system. Looking at ways that we can connect students more through activities and through more supportive adults. Our next step that we moved into was we, as a district, participate in a regional racial equity group. This proclamation was signed in June of 2020, the culmination of groundwork laid by the NAACP, the Lynn Benton Lincoln ESD, Corvallis School District, GAPS, Philoma School District, and Lebanon Community School District. This policy is a joint commitment to hold each other up and to hold our entire community accountable and collectively supportive to the work that we are dedicated to for every student across all of our communities. You also, later that year in August, adopted an educational equity policy. This policy, though adapted from other policies that we saw in neighboring school districts, also was made our own. One of the things that was unique about the work that was done on this equity policy is the fact that students really had a good hard look at it. Our communities of color, our partners in our communities of color, also provided us good hard feedback. We have community partners in our Intersectional Youth United group that also coached us around appropriate language, inclusive language to be using. Later that year, when the state of Oregon adopted All Students Belong, You, as board members, were prepared because you had already completed the educational equity policy. The All Students Belong Act, if you remember, is holding accountable bias incident complaints, making sure that we are addressing any symbols of hate and not allowing them on school grounds. You also had an unprecedented opportunity to actually invest in students, which not many school boards have had the opportunity to do over the last 20 years. So just as our state school fund was improving, so did we see investment through the student investment account. And our strategic planning prioritized these three things, and so then did the investments in the SIA. These are the 5 strategies that we reviewed a moment ago. And then here's the budget update. So the originally planned funding was $7.2 million. In the first year, which was last year, we received 30% of that funding. We actually are looking now at full funding. Those investments have been to hire counselors to staff every elementary school and to extend mental health partnerships and contracts in secondary schools. We are in the process of those hires right now. Hiring middle school structured support, behavioral support coaches, behavior specialists, middle school deans. It says hire RN. We hired more than one RN, so COVID came about, and whereas we used to have 2 nurses on staff, we now have 5, and I think we could safely say that 5 is not enough. We have invested in licensed clinical social workers and behavioral transition support. We also are partnering with equity groups for district equity audits and training, hiring intervention specialists at the middle school level. We have instructional coaches at elementary and middle school, particularly looking at high-quality teaching of AVID strategies and QTEL strategies, which is quality teaching for English learners. We've hired mentors of color, and we've invested heavily in the student diversity pipeline. We have a Grow Your Own program now here in the school district where you as board members have facilitated our ability to invest in classified staff who are interested in becoming teachers. We have many classified staff right now who are in their teacher education programs, staff of color and bilingual staff. We also have recent graduates from our high schools who are in that program. We've hired a curriculum coordinator and support staff, and we have significantly increased the recruitment and retention of diverse staff. The most significant, aside from hiring our Executive Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Javier Cervantes, we also have been able to really literally change the face of our Human Resources Department. So we have, our Human Resources Department is now our most diverse department or school or program within the school district. And I think that all of the staff in HR now are either bilingual or racially diverse, except for the Executive Director of HR, Heather Husefka, who is a woman. So we are pretty proud of that department right now. And what's nice about that is that means every staff member who gets hired into GAPS will see someone who looks like them or has a much greater probability of seeing someone who looks like them or has a shared experience as they do right from the very beginning. We have had key leadership team members participate in courageous conversations about race, and that has gotten all the way down to classified staff members at this point. We've expanded our Albany Online opportunities, which was critical as we prepared for and then went into the pandemic. We've eliminated sports fees in this new budget. We are increasing middle school opportunities, recreational space, and opportunities at the elementary level. We're reducing kinder and first grade class sizes markedly, which is very exciting to be able to do. hired elementary school PE teachers, so we have been part of a grant process, and we needed to make sure that we were independent of that grant in order to run our physical education classes, which has been really important for us. We've looked at increasing the school year by 4 days. The pandemic really did a number on us with increasing that school year time. We've increased our librarian support, so all of our middle schools now have a half-time certified librarian. Increased pre-K opportunities dramatically, especially in partnership throughout the pandemic. Placing modulars at Waverly, and I'm missing one other site.
The initial ones were for Waverly and Nays.
Thank you.
Initially, we wanted to have satellite programs, but with the bubble that will come in for kinder next year, it will be for classroom space. So.
Yep. We had some unforeseen costs. So we had almost $1 million in Chromebook purchases that needed to be made in order to allow students to learn remotely. Zoom cost us a chunk of money. Canvas, which is a learning management system, and Seesaw, which is the same system for younger children. And Parent Square, there's no D there, were all unforeseen costs that we were also able to fold in to SIA. And then finally, I wanted to really point out to you and express my appreciation, my personal appreciation for this particularly. You, as board members, the 5 of you together, have amplified student voice. You have shifted the roles of student board members, as LJ can attest to. They now have voting positions on the board, though their votes don't officially count. They certainly are recorded. And I would say our 2 student board members this year were more active than any student board members I have witnessed in the boards that I've worked with over my career about meaningful and school district changing issues. You have met with and advocated for our LGBTQ 2IA plus community and improving our board policies and our district practices. You have welcomed and learned from our historically underserved communities. You have expected that our board policies are translated into Spanish, and that interpretation is offered at every board meeting and district forum so that we are assured that our families can access the most important work of the district and have a voice. You have supported Assistant Superintendent Harlan and myself in our meeting with the parents of our Black students, which has been incredibly important over the last 16 months, particularly over the protests of last summer, through the difficult times up through the election time period, that we also saw during that time period an increased number of racialized issues here in Albany against some of our very own students very recently. You have adopted board policies for equity and belonging, and you are repeatedly asking about how we are diversifying our staff and how we are addressing student needs. And all of those things that you have done have made a difference, not just for the students who are attending school today, but for the students who will be attending school in the future. So, Chair Butzner, oh, your T dropped. Former Chair Jennifer Ward and Director Justin Roach, thank you very much for your service. And with that, while applause is going on, all right, so we have for each of you, for the 3 adults, and we have something else for LJ. But for each of you, we have an engraved plaque that reads your name, Kim Butzner, spelled correctly on the plaque. Board of Directors, 2017 to 2021. Board Chair, 2020 to 2021. Building bridges to lifelong learning and brighter futures. Thank you all. I really honestly cannot imagine having gone through the first 2 years of this leadership without the 3 of you. and particularly through this pandemic. So thank you all very much. And yours says Jennifer Ward.
Oh, good.
I'm not going to hug you because of your ribs.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, and if I can, Director Thompson, Vice Chair, I'm just going to. All right. And so this last one is to recognize our graduating senior, LJ Carmichael. LJ, you are a leader for youth and for the future adults who are going to make a difference within their local communities. You are what I refer to as an equity warrior, and I just ask that you keep that lens. There will be plenty to fight for when you are over in Hawaii, and we will still, I'm sure, have more for you to do when you get back. So thank you so much for your service.
Melissa, I think we should send Andrew down to the county and city to get some of that TLT money for some great reasons to move to Albany on that list.
So as we were watching the video along with it, I can speak to when Jen and I started. Obviously, we've been together, the three of us, a shorter period of time, but for her and I, 4 years. And that first couple of years was crazy in its own right as well, in many ways. And watching all of the work that's been done from the bond project and the funds approved by the community members is just nothing shy of amazing. We have some great educational facilities. We had some great ones before, but we have really been able to increase that for so many additional opportunities. And I'm excited to see what we're able to offer all of our students going forward, in addition to the equity work, the funding that comes along with all of that, and the work we've been able to do with that money has been a lot. It's odd not to have people here from doing our bond reports all the time anymore, actually. Gone are the days of board packets that were 400 or 500 pages long. But, well, at least for a while, maybe. We'll see. So it's been an honor to serve. I know this last year, a year and a half, has been a little tumultuous and crazy, and nothing that any of us wanted or would have liked to have had to go through in the middle of making great advancements for education and our students in Albany. And I appreciate the opportunity to have served in this capacity, and we'll always remember it, and we'll always be a part of where we go forward, for sure. So, thank you. Jen, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, but I'm not as good off script, so I wrote something down. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay. So I think that when you serve in any capacity, you find that in the end, you have received more than you have given. And that has certainly been true of my service on the GAP School Board. I've learned a tremendous amount about education, about how our district functions, and about how local governance works. I've developed new skills and refined others. I've discovered strengths I didn't know I had, and also, as Melissa puts it, opportunities for growth. I value the many interactions and conversations I've had with district staff, building administrators, teachers, bus drivers, food service providers, educational assistants, custodians, and all the individuals that do the daily work of serving and educating our students. There's no question that the time I've been able to spend with our students and their parents has been the big payoff for being a board member. But more than anything, serving on the board has given me the opportunity to be in the company of giants, my 6 colleagues on the board, Esperanza too, Board Secretary Chris Green, Assistant Superintendent Lisa Harlan, and Superintendent Melissa Goff. Their dedication has inspired me. Your commitment has blown wind into my sails. I've become not just a better school board member because of all of you, but a better person. Thank you to the voters of Albany for allowing me this unparalleled experience.
I feel like I just started. Still figuring out where the bathrooms are. It has really been, particularly from working for a district for 11 years to then sit in this role, it has been a real honor. And the highlight has been working with my fellow board members. I have just really appreciated you, your compassion, your willingness to listen and to seek truth in a job that can be tough. My wife has heard me say over the last few weeks that I'm eager to be done. It's been tough over the last few months, but I was reminded recently that my, having to deal with social media or whatever is nothing compared to some of the harassment, bullying experiences that some of our students in the district face. And I really, first off, I have to say thank you to Melissa and Lisa and the board for seeking out those voices. And I really hope our new board members can take that to heart and continue that work. That's really, truly the work, is seeking out those ones that we're not hearing from, and getting a sense to what is the truth out there, what's the real environment like for our students and families. So thank you all. I appreciate it.
You. We'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I do have 3 in a row, 3 items in a row. If you don't mind, I think I've queued them up out of order, however, so we'll see if I can find. Yes, sort of. All right, so some edits are gone, but that's okay. So I wanted to share with you tonight a little report, a little update on the data collections for spring 2021 learning options. So we'll take a look at elementary, middle, and high school feedback. And this first group is the elementary data. This was data collected between the middle of May and the middle of June when school got out. And you can see we only had 3 students who answered. And those, I'm not sure where those students were from. I didn't look. Partly because if the N is under number 5, it won't tell me. So, but we had pretty good participation from parents and teachers and school support staff. So what we found in that data, most of these questions are very similar from age level to age level, but you'll see that they're a little bit different. So you can see parent or guardian feedback in the first column and teacher in the middle column and school support staff in the third column. The higher percentage is the positive number. The darker the blue is also helpful for you. So if it's a lighter background, then we just didn't score as well in that. So generally, you can see that parents and staff felt supported by their schools. There were concerns by teachers about adequate mental health supports for students and staff, and that's an ongoing concern. We'll see that pattern throughout the data. School support staff, interestingly, felt had quite a bit higher of a take on how we're doing there. And again, we had fairly positive feedback regarding basic needs being met for our students and families. We focused a lot on that, making sure that students got the food that they needed, that their basic supplies were provided. Technology access was a big focus of the school district, and I want to thank Rob Singleton and his team for all of the work that they've done around that. The first question is whether or not we know who to go to when technology problems arise. And parents or guardians seem to know best who to go to or how to help. Teachers and school support staff, though strong, not quite as strong as we would like to see. About 61% of our kids can print at home, which is a little bit of a tech gap that we might be assuming is not there, so something for us to be paying attention to in the future. Technology problems being quickly resolved is teachers report about 50%, with support staff saying that's a bit higher. When there are problems with access or with the devices themselves, people generally know who to contact. Students have the tech they need to complete schoolwork according to teachers. Parents didn't get that question. But parents did say that their children have access to a desktop, laptop, or tablet, which is good because we handed those things out, and internet access. However, remember that this is an electronically answered survey. So the only people answering it are people who actually have access to a desktop, laptop, or tablet. And so you would expect those percentages to be quite high, and you may see kind of a false high there. So then the next three areas, student learning, pandemic precautions, and internal communications. A reminder as we get through these, this survey was actually created through partnership with the New Teacher Project. None of these questions were built by us. We don't build any of the questions. We don't crunch any of the data. All we do is send a link for student staff to answer, parents to answer, and then TNTP ends up crunching all the data for us. So we can see that parents felt good about help with student schoolwork. They weren't feeling as confident with grade level expectations. The challenge with that is we don't know if they were too low or too high. They felt that they got fairly good feedback on assignments, but we'd like to see more teacher feedback, particularly when we're seeing kids not being in person. But kids overall could easily turn in completed assignments. Again, we see under pandemic precautions some of those same statements repeated around mental health supports, and we saw that answer earlier. This is an interesting question we'll see later. I trust school or district leaders to make the right decisions to keep students or staff safe. 36% of teachers, a higher percentage of school support staff on that. What's interesting on that particular question is, if you'll recall, and I'm sure you will, we had a lot of strong opinions regarding what is the right decision regarding keeping students and staff safe. Is that more health and safety protocols or fewer health and safety protocols? Internal communications. I know what to expect if my district mandates a change in learning method, and I receive consistent messaging about the district's plans for this school year. So the darker blue, that medium dark blue, that means agree and strongly agree. That lighter blue means somewhat agree and strongly agree. So then moving into middle schools, we really didn't have the same level of engagement at our middle schools in this round of data. I'm not sure why that was. We actually had one middle school that had strong participation this year, or this spring. And remember, this is the first year we have done this survey. We asked these questions 3 times during the school year to get a feel for how we were doing. We really were interested in, when we started with the pandemic, how were things going? In the middle, were we doing better? And then once we got back to some people still in CDL and some people in person, how were folks feeling? And that's what this survey is. These are higher numbers around how folks feel supported by their school. Parents and guardians are a little bit lower than we would hope to see. Again, adequate mental health support for students and staff scores very low from teachers. That's not a surprise when we look at the fact that in elementary schools, we've had no counselors prior to what we're investing into for next year. But also at middle schools, not having enough time in that area during the pandemic, certainly. But folks did feel overall that student and family basic needs are being met. What's interesting, however, is that the parent and staff feelings around that weren't aligned. And so I'd be interested in learning more about why we think or don't think that basic needs are being met when parents are seeing them as having been met. Technology access, again, not as many kids can print at home as we might be thinking. Tech problems, though, overall are quickly resolved. Folks generally know who to contact if they have a problem with access or devices, a few less so for parents, but teachers and school staff, that's a really high percentage there at the middle school. And again, access, ubiquitous access for students for internet and a laptop or tablet, but again, that's who's filling out the survey. Student learning, now we get student answers, which is fun. So students feel like they are getting help with schoolwork and that they can easily turn in their completed assignments. It looks like they might like a little more feedback on assignments, and parents or guardians aren't feeling confident around the grade level expectations perhaps being too low or too high. Trusting district leaders to make the right decisions to keep students safe. Again, 1 in 4 teachers and 1 in 3 school support staff report that. The mental health question again, the basic need question again, and then internal communications. So I've received consistent messaging about the district plans for this school year. More school support staff feel that they have than teachers, which is something for us to investigate regarding our communication methodologies and what's working with different staff members. And then that folks knowing what to expect if we mandate a change in how kids are learning. That isn't quite as high as we would like to see either. So the last is data from our high schools. How supported do you feel by your school? Only about 1/3 of our students, our high school students, reported feeling supported by their school. Higher, much higher percentages there for teachers and support staff. Mental health supports, actually teachers and staff have a higher perception there than they did in the younger grades, which may again be indicative of the fact that we do have counselors at the high school level and have a little bit more mental health partnerships as well. Basic needs being met, fairly consistent across all 3 groups. Tech access is not dissimilar to what we saw in the younger grades. Folks generally have access, printing at home, still not necessarily a common access point, but they know who to contact. Student learning around help with schoolwork. Students feel like they're getting the help that they need from schoolwork about 2/3 of the time, or 2/3 of the students do. Again, parents or guardians not sure about the grade level expectations being met. Feedback on assignments at the high school was rated the lowest among the 3 groups. But at the high school, students felt most comfortable turning in their completed work. For pandemic precautions, trusting school and district leaders to make the right decisions to keep staff safe, and students and staff safe, again, low numbers there. Mental health support, we saw those, and basic needs we saw. And then I have received consistent messaging about the district plans for this school year, pretty widespread, again, between teachers and school support staff. So what is it that is working for support staff but isn't working with our teachers? How do we improve that as we move forward? And then I know what to expect if my district mandates a change in a learning method. There wasn't a lot of confidence in that either. I think at this point, folks were probably really hoping we weren't going to change learning method again, and hopefully we are not. So that's good news. Other updates I wanted to give you as a part of this last report, and this is good for the incoming board members to learn as well, because these are the new accomplishments by the Oregon legislature. So the state school fund is being funded at $9.3 billion. We had asked for $9.6 billion, but $9.3 billion is an improvement over where we started in the conversation, so we're pleased with that. The student investment account is fully funded, which we had last been told was going to be about 75 to 80% funded, so that's exciting. The high school success or Measure 98 dollars, oftentimes people refer to it as the CTE dollars. Those too will be fully funded. All very good news. $22 million for statewide student success plans for specific student demographics. $41 million for our ESDs to help us in our Student Success Act implementation work. There's also a lot of money going into early learning. We have, here we have what is called a childcare desert here in this area in Albany. We really experienced that during the pandemic. It became even more glaring. We have had some great partnerships with United Way and pre-K agencies across the community, but these investments certainly will help us as we move forward. Unfortunately, all this money doesn't go to us, just a little bit. A few interesting pieces that passed. House Bill 2056 for linguistic inclusion passed, and this is promoting Oregon students by replacing English or English language arts with language arts, which includes reading, writing, and other communication in any language, including English. So if students are coming in as older students with strong mastery of their native language, they can get credit for the mastery of their language as language arts credits. Tribal regalia and objects of cultural significance passed. That actually happened before graduation, which was exciting. So we had a lot of Indigenous students who were able to wear their tribal regalia, where some school districts were not allowing that. The LGBTQ2 SIA Plus Student Success Plan passed. That is over $2 million to support students who identify in those categories. House Bill 2697, which is the next iteration of Every Students Belong, around prohibiting the use of or display of any symbols of hate on school property that include the Confederate flag, the noose, and
The swastika.
the swastika. Thank you. And then House Bill 2001, retaining culturally or linguistically diverse teachers during layoffs passed. This was a very big bill. Typically, unions have not wanted this to be a protection because typically seniority has been the protection for unions. This is really great for trying to have our workforce reflect our students. We also have some other things to be prepared for. Senate Bill 580 now has class size as a mandatory subject of bargaining, which is a big deal for schools that qualify for assistance for Title I. So that will definitely impact our work as we continue to move forward. 732, the Equity Advisory Committees passed. This requires every school district to have an Educational Equity Advisory Committee to advise both the school board and the superintendent on equity impacts of policy decisions and budgets. Assistant Superintendent Harlan and I have been working with an Equity Advisory Committee weekly for about the last year and a half, but this would expand that committee to be more inclusive and to also be advising the school board. And Senate Bill 744, high school graduation requirements passed, which pauses the essential skills requirement for 3 years, for the next 3 years. So, and they're looking for improvements to the high school grad requirements after having worked with diverse stakeholders. And I think that is it. Whew. That's my update for you. So it's what you get to watch from the sidelines. Yeah, and then the last one I hadn't uploaded there. So, and then the last piece that I wanted to talk with you about, I'm actually going to need a minute to open on that screen. So if you could just give me maybe 2 minutes to get it transferred over.
While we are doing that, do any of the board members need to take a reprieve, a little break?
Just gonna fill my water up.
Okay, why don't we,
Just
while
adjourn
she's doing
for
that,
2
take a
minutes
couple
or a
minutes? Yeah.
recess?
Apologies.
No problem. All right, so I wanted to take the opportunity tonight to just do a recap of the high school schedule, where we've been, the information that has kind of gone into the high school schedule. And it's not to take any detours from the work that we're currently on, but simply to make sure that we have a common understanding on what has been considered to date. So the high school team considerations. When we decided to go to a common high school schedule, that decision was not made this year or last year during my first 2 years here. That decision has been discussed over the course of many years. and has continued to resurface. When the South Albany High School team went to their current high school schedule, they did a lot of community engagement and a lot of investigation around the schedule that they ended up choosing based upon what they saw as needs for students that they are serving. That work helped inform the conversations that were had by the high school teams, as did the experience that West Albany High School has had with their long-time schedule that they have had. But I wanted to start out by just a review of the attendance area boundary map to remind all of us that the conversation about a high school schedule is actually not a conversation about a schedule. When we're talking about equity and access to courses, when we're talking about being able to take the same number of advanced courses at one school as you can take at the other, or being able to take the same interesting courses in career and technical education at one school as another, one of the first things we need to do is take a look at why are the school offerings different. Now, this bond intentionally made the informed decision to have fewer spaces at each school, more classes being able to be taught across the district by having specialized spaces at each of the two schools, rather than repeating the same spaces at the two schools during this update. As we know, some of the spaces that were built prior to the bond at West or at South were catering towards certain courses only. This bond work helped really expand at each of the schools what offerings are now available, but certainly those offerings are not the same at both schools. So looking here, we're looking at the attendance area boundary map for South Albany in the pink and West Albany in the lavender, which you can clearly see the boundary line delineated. This is a map of household income. This is Albany. Now you don't see all of Albany. It's just kind of a zoomed in, kind of a small different angle there than you see here. But this is Albany, and this is just based on poverty. So where you see the darkest greens is where the more wealthy folks are living, greatest pockets of wealth. Where you see the darker red, the darker the red, the greater, the lower the income status of that neighborhood. When you look at the attendance boundaries drawn over the top of these neighborhoods, you can see that over here is West, and over here is South. So this first picture shows us that almost the entirety of the highest income populations within the Greater Albany Public School District is in the West attendance boundary, and almost all of the lower income is in the South attendance boundary. Now there is this jog right here that is within the West attendance boundary, and that is a lower socioeconomic area within our community. This map shows our Hispanic and Latino community cross-referenced by income. So this is still an income-based map, but now it's only looking at Hispanic and Latino families, and you are seeing, again, that same wealth distribution here on the left-hand side, and you're seeing over here the greater pockets of poverty. So the darker the red, the lower the income. And then when you see the boundary lines, you can see again very clearly that division between south and west. Now, what's interesting here about this pocket is even in the Latino Hispanic community that attends West, they are not the lowest socioeconomic students within that community. So you're still seeing the greatest poverty within that community all going to South Albany. So when schools are then looking at who we serve and how well do we serve them, they are looking at the students who are enrolled in their schools. And we know that the demographics of those two high schools are very different than each other. When we had the schools take a look at their proposed schedules, so each team brought forth, each of the West and South school teams brought forth a proposed schedule for consideration, we had them review through an equity lens, and this is the state of Oregon equity lens, the considerations that they were bringing. And these were the questions, and I'll walk you through them one by one. I'll walk you through 4 of these. There are 7 in the list overall. So the first question was, who are the racial, ethnic, and underserved groups who are affected? And what is the potential impact of the resource allocation and strategic investment to these groups? So when you look at the schedule, what's the impact of that on these groups? And you can see the answers over here are for the 7-period hybrid. Students receive more total class time each week. It's about 50 minutes more per week in the 7-period hybrid schedule. They talk about a study published in Science Daily, specifically about the needs of students who are learning the English language. They state that each class meeting daily is often easier for students to catch up on missed work. Now, on the other hand, we can look over at the 8-period block hybrid schedule, and it's seen as a drawback that students who are learning English would only have 3 classes per week, and that world language and bilingual education program students would have longer periods in between classes, but there are advantages. So through an AVID lens, if we're teaching AVID, you could divide up your class. You don't spend a whole 90 minutes doing it. You could spend 45 minutes teaching AVID and couple that with another course. The SSC classroom can have greater support for our students in special education. But because of the limitations of staff, you can't actually staff every student in 8 periods. You don't have enough staff for every student to go to class for 8 periods. And so you'll find in even the current West schedule, which isn't the schedule proposed here, that seniors are required to take only 6 classes and juniors are required to take only 7 classes. We have between 10 and 15% of juniors and seniors at West Albany who take a full caseload. With the AB block schedule, kids could possibly only see their teacher once or twice a week, which would make for a long time with unanswered questions. That would really only be if there was a class on Monday or Friday. Still sticking with this question, on the 7-period hybrid, looking at students who have ADHD or other specific disabilities that hinder them from paying attention for 90-minute blocks, tend to have an easier time paying attention in a 50-minute more traditional class period. Again, that depends on how well the teacher is able to teach in a block. If a teacher is able to teach well in a 90-minute block and really divide that into 3 30-minute chunks, then that difference diminishes between the effectiveness of the models. One of the comments here was that Mondays in the 8-period block may be a complete loss of instruction after roll is taken because it's shortened so much. Classes needed to shorten so much on that 8-period day. The concern was that students who are hands-on learners and are in art and shop classes will not have the time to work on projects on Mondays. PE classes won't be able to dress down, and that this would affect students that are on track to be skilled laborers and impacts physical fitness. Now remember that this question asks, who are the underserved groups affected? Who are the racial and ethnic groups? So really paying attention to the responses that these team members gave a lot of thought to around, well, who do each of these schedules serve well, and where might be some limitations. They then went on and analyzed, how does the investment advance opportunities for students? And we talked a little bit earlier about one of the best indicators for student success in college. Actually, I think I mentioned this not earlier tonight in this meeting, but earlier in another meeting earlier today. One of the best indicators is the sequence of courses that are taken by students of advanced coursework in high school, not necessarily the GPA, but whether they took a full sequence of advanced courses, rather than stopping math, for example, after their junior year, but continued into their senior year. So under the 7-period hybrid schedule, folks pointed out that the discrepancy in the boundary map related to SES and the community Latino population with the higher minority and lower SES population. This schedule was proposed with equity in mind for that. Also talking about funded after-school programs have shown to increase academic achievement and decrease classroom behaviors, adding that more instruction in a specific content area equals increased confidence and understanding. In an 8-period block, looking at support classes may be offered on alternating days. So if you have math every other day, you could have a math support class on the opposite day from mathematics. Similarly, it gives an additional period for special education students to have other classes for electives. Having freshmen start their day with breakfast in the classroom can be helpful, creating a family dynamic in the classroom. If you're credit deficient, it makes it easier to make up credits. With your CTE pathways, you have more, you can take more credits, so it's easier to get there. And the argument that elective opportunities keep kids in school. There are a few statements here that are around repeating a semester or being credit deficient, and then on the counter side in the other schedule, it is you wouldn't need to make up classes if you had more time in the classes in the first place. You're more likely to pass the courses the first time you take them. There were just a lot more answers on this particular question for the 7-period hybrid. I'm just including everything that was stated there. This long answer, and you can look at it. I will include this on, for those of you watching at home, this will be uploaded onto our district website, so you'll be able to see all of this. But you can see the studies and the outcomes there. And really looking at the importance for students to have contact with their teachers 4 days a week. This, for me, as I'm looking at this, is one of those pieces that struck me the most, because we are going to have kids coming back after the pandemic with a real need for us to have our eye on their success and their emotional safety. Does the decision being made ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences? And what is the impact of the schedule itself on eliminating the opportunity gap? So again, you see more responses there, talking about consistent scheduling so that students have more opportunity to take classes at LB. A 7-period day gives students 28 credit chances, but with more time to devote to each class. As I was saying earlier, more likelihood that they'll pass that course. On the other hand, with the 8-period block, an ELD teacher can schedule students with more classes, but then it adds to the teacher case management load for tracking progress. And I haven't seen very many mentions about teacher burdens in this. Most people most responses were really focusing on the students here. If a student is assigned a study skills class, they don't have opportunities to take other classes. So study skills in this model is for freshmen and sophomores. All freshmen and sophomores are required to take study skills. What are the barriers to more equitable outcomes? One of the concerns was transportation for students if they need a zero period. So when the teams were talking about this, they talked about, gosh, some of our kids who are used to an 8-period schedule would then need to take a 0 period in order to feel like they still have that 8 period, and how would they get to and from school? And on the other hand, looking at for support of students who are learning English, they would need to then be paired with study skills. And so they would effectively be what we call out as pulled out for English language development for 90 minutes every day, which is usually well beyond what is required for students to be pulled out of classes. There was also mention here of the structure of the collective bargaining agreement. We are working a lot on minutes and how many minutes get taught and how much passing time, and that's not going to be easy no matter what schedule we go to. And then they talked a bit about singletons. So if classes are only taught one time, it can limit student class opportunities. So those were the considerations that the teacher teams, the administrative teams discussed as they were kind of really digging into their thinking around what could a common potential schedule look like, so that students could take classes at both campuses, and so that we could address some of these equity concerns that we have. Beyond what they were considering, there are considerations that I've also been making as I've been listening to staff and listening to students and then looking at additional data. One of the pieces that staff asked for was kind of a summary of what's the qualitative data that we saw from strategic planning last year. All of these are just direct pulls of statements from students or parents. They're definitely not all of the comments, but they're just a representative group. The district has a mission and vision, but there seems to be division. There's a sense of segregation or disparity among some schools. For example, North Albany schools / West versus other schools. All schools should have balanced diversity, race, socioeconomic status, disability, etc. No school should be above the other. Remember, if we go back and look at the maps, we know that we don't have racial and socioeconomic diversity at the two high schools, in an equivalent factor. Schools and programs make up the district, so should collaborate together year-round to improve student participation and success and family involvement and build and strengthen camaraderie between all staff. I'll say that's one of the things that during the staff forum, staff from both schools talked about was this opportunity for them, especially where they teach singleton courses at their own school, where they'll be able to plan with staff members from the other school who also teach that same subject. Other comments included expanding world language offerings, equality of opportunities, change the divisions in schools, allow students of color to have support groups, and mention META as one of those. Continue to add more career and education classes, more elective classes, and more vocational training opportunities for students. This is a very blurry lift. So the Oregon Student Health Survey came out. The preliminary results were just sent to me early last week, and on the 21st. And we had, for this part of the survey, we had 297 11th graders participate, 164 of them completed this. And an interesting response for me in regards to this particular issue was the response to this statement. At this school, there is conflict or tension based on race, ethnicity, culture, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or disability. And 1 in 4 of the students who answered this question stated that that was true, 1 in 4 of the 11th graders. This speaks directly to 2 of those statements that I spoke about earlier that came right from our strategic planning work. So then the other thing was our high school spring data, which I showed that to you earlier, so you already saw some of that feedback. But there were also some pieces from staff. So staff were concerned that when I met with them, and through emails that I've received from them as well, that the process was just too fast, that having it change like this the fall after the COVID pandemic will be too much change. Some of the administrators felt that they were voting on a 7-period versus an 8-period schedule, but not on the actual proposed schedules themselves that had been put forth by the staff teams. And some of the staff stated that they did not know that we were going to change to a common schedule. These, here are more answers from the survey that we looked at earlier. This is disaggregated data for South and West Albany. And there are a number of statements within that survey for them to respond to. There are also, on some of the items, they ask the same question 2 different times at different points in the survey to try and calibrate and validate results. So this was, I've received clear expectations regarding my role from my school leader. This is school staff. So this is all of the school staff. And at South, very high, agree, strongly agree. At West, even higher, strongly agree and agree. I think they had 87% there at West, which is great. However, there's a big difference from that last slide to this one. So this is one of those statements that was included twice in the survey. And just for the statistical significance, 30% of staff at the 2 schools answered these questions. So this is data that is relevant for us to be viewing. So to the question of, I have received consistent messaging about the district plans for this year. We saw a huge difference between South and West staff, both times that statement was asked or was given in the 2, both times it was presented. So you can see that the first time it was presented for South, that 53% agreed or strongly agreed, and then another 21% somewhat agreed. When we look at the answer for West, this is representative, I think of it was 3 maybe people who strongly agreed. No one agreed. And the rest of somewhat agreed was 44%. But that is a really big difference. It was repeated again later. You see that in both cases, both schools now felt a little more strongly about it when they saw the statement later in the survey, and yet still a really big gap between South feeling like they've received consistent messaging about the district plans this year and West feeling that way. Similarly, when we look at South versus West, the district having their child's best interests at heart scored much higher at South than at West. So when we look at the staff concerns, some staff stated that they didn't know we were going to change to a common schedule. This staff was almost exclusively West Albany staff, and the communication differences that we saw between the buildings would support that assertion, that they weren't aware of district level info in the same way that South was. The process being too fast, for those who didn't know it was coming, it must have felt way too fast. If you weren't aware that it was even on the horizon, it must have been feeling really, really quick. And we will be taking much more time on the permanent change. And I did talk to staff about that this is really a 6-month work session that we'll be doing not only with school staffs, but with students and their parents in the community around where will we go for a permanent school schedule change. Change the fall after COVID being too much. And this is where I talked about, I recognize, it's going to be really hard after COVID to experience another change. I also recognize that the kids who are going to be freshmen and the kids who are going to be sophomores next year haven't known a regular schedule yet at their home high school. So we are talking about a rather small group of students overall for whom this will feel like excessive change. It's going to feel new to everyone, I guess, regardless of the schedule that they're in. My larger concern in consideration, it was for more daily interaction to be happening with teachers so that we can help monitor students' social and emotional health. One of the things I have heard consistently, no matter where parents felt we were, whether they felt we've been too conservative with our safety protocols or not conservative enough with our safety protocols, they would all agree that this year has been extremely hard for their students' mental and emotional health, and they're very concerned. We as staff have also talked about that at great lengths, that we expect our students and our staff are going to come back this fall with trauma that they haven't fully dealt with and are not prepared to feel when they re-enter in the fall. We know that the more consistent interactions that folks can have, the better we'll be able to support each other. Some admin felt that they were voting on the 7 versus 8 period. This confusion wasn't shared by all, yet it shouldn't impact the overall decision significantly, given that they were still voting on the 7 versus 8. So it was definitely, I think, a feeling that administrators was a sore point for administrators because there wasn't clarity for them on what they were voting for. And we've talked about that a bit, and I'm not sure that the sore point will completely go away. And it points to the need for clarity as we move forward. Student concerns. So students talked about a lack of time between classes. They're concerned that students would need to miss class in order to be on another campus. They don't want to do that. Students who planned to take an 8-period load at West, they'd be forced to make decisions between advanced coursework or electives. There was concern that shifting to a 7-period day would prevent West Albany students for qualifying as valedictorians or for finishing their required credits for graduation. Those were direct communications to me from several students or parents. And there were also concerns that a 7-period day would limit the college options available to students who are moving from an 8 to a 7-period day. So I wanted to address those, and we've got a couple more quotes on here. So these quotes came from earlier, from the strategic planning work. But our transportation is going to be scheduled in a format where students will be taking 2 or more classes on the other campus. It allows us to lengthen travel time without shortening classes. So we're going to really use the nutritional breaks and lunchtime to be the primary times that kids are transported between schools. The concern that students have around being forced to make a priority choice around which courses they want to take, that remains an issue. And it's not really dissimilar to the prioritization students who are in support programs must make when they're required to enroll in special education classes or ESL classes, and they then in turn are losing an elective. None of our students want to have fewer options to take classes they are either interested in or that they feel could push them academically. That is a hard thing. Valedictorian status, though, will not be negatively impacted by our schedule change. I've already talked to the administration regarding that. And we have students who graduate in the 7-period day and earn the same college options as those who are in 8-period blocks. So some of that I think is just anecdotal, that students don't realize that kids from all different schedules are getting into elite schools, from both of our high schools are getting into elite schools. And so we recognize that this is a hard change, and I wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity to kind of more formally address in a way that folks would have greater access to some of those pieces of feedback that we've been receiving. And that is it. Do you have any questions?
Could you go back just a couple of slides?
Sure.
To, one more, please.
Oop.
Oh,
Oop.
yeah.
There.
So looking at so there's differences in communication of district information at the 2 high schools. So as a district office, like, we communicate to the administrators at the high schools who then disseminate.
Yeah. We kind of have multiple ways of communicating, and we did talk to the staff about this when we met with them too, and I showed them that data, so they've seen, the staff have all seen this data. We have a lot of communication that comes out of Andrew's office that happens Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We have different communications that come from him. Every Monday, at the high school level, Carrie Tatum, the secondary director, produces what's called Monday Notes, and she actually emails those not just to the administrators, but I believe she now actually emails them to all staff at the high schools, because earlier in the year we had heard that there was this difference in information getting directly to them. And then for the most part, the communications do happen with the administrative teams. And so what I talked to the staffs about when we were together from both schools was that clearly we need to do something different for in our partnership with the West administration for how we're getting information to their staff than for what we're doing at South. What we're doing at South does seem to be a lot more effective. We're approaching both schools in the same way, but it's having a different outcome.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for this report.
Just real quick, you mentioned that this isn't a new decision. Can you talk a little bit about, so before you were here, certainly before I was here, this conversation was happening as part of the bond design work? Is that right?
And I think, I'll tell you, I went back and looked in the bond notes, and I didn't go through all of them, and I certainly didn't go through all the board meeting minutes, but there's not a lot of documentation of the conversations happening formally. I know that informally the conversations were happening prior to my being here. Brent Belville was talking to his staff about it. I know that the South Albany staff talked about the fact that both Brent and Nate talked to them about moving to the same schedule. Lisa and I have certainly talked to the administrative teams many times since I've been here. It was one of the first things that the then board chair who hired me was Micah Smith. He wasn't still here when I started, but when he hired me, that was one of the things that that and the equity work were the two things that he said were really important for us as we move forward. And I recognize that people may have different opinions now than they did 2 years ago or 4 years ago as far as that alignment is concerned. But the conversation itself certainly seems to have been a part of the fabric of the high school conversation and needs for the district to really create equitable outcomes for kids for a long period of time. It seems to me from the anecdotal information that I hear that it's just been a can that's been kicked down the road, perhaps not started early enough, or perhaps not landing well enough, perhaps having enough concerns raised, that it just hasn't actually happened yet.
So as you look at the opportunities that were developed at each building, I mean, it was purposeful that opportunity A wouldn't also be made over here, so we could create as many opportunities district-wide for
Yeah.
students. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
And I can speak, Jen and I both can speak to the fact that we had a lot of those conversations in our board meetings, as we were approving where funds were going to be spent for certain facilities at South or certain facilities at West, a lot of the conversation about what we were approving was based on the fact that we knew we would eventually be looking at the same schedule so that all of our students would be able to take advantage of all the classes. I think I was one of the board members when I first started that asked the question for a list of all the classes offered between the two schools. And it was very different, significantly so. And I said, so how are we going through this bond project and ensuring that the similar things that are being offered in one school are offered in another? Are we creating facilities for that? It's hard to do that. And so instead of creating facilities the same at both places and having to have teachers be able to teach at both places and the cost of equipment and things for all of those different classes, we agreed to put space. And there were times when we expended funds for one school that hadn't been planned for, specifically to provide a space there, knowing they'd be able to offer some courses. And with the understanding from our perspective that that meant all of the kids in the district would be able to take advantage of all of those classes. You know, I don't think it's so much for any of us about the fact that what the perfect schedule is. There's going to be some debate. It wouldn't matter if we did it this year, if we do it next year, if we do it the year after. There's still going to be discrepancy about who feels which schedule is going to be best. I think the bottom line is that it needs to be the same because we really need to be able to offer equitable courses for all students and equitable opportunities. And that goes both directions. There's things offered at both schools that are different that other students would benefit from being able to take. So it has been a large part of our discussion all along as it related to the board. It was never anything other than we've always had that expectation. We always were trying to get to that point, and the goal in mind was when the facilities were there and we had those classes available, we would start offering that. Again, nobody anticipated COVID hitting and all the other things that we've experienced. And unfortunately, change is going to happen. When is the perfect time for it? You know, we can say it won't be this year. We don't know what we have in store for this next year. We hope it's a normal year, but it may not be. You know, we never know anymore. So it's kind of one of those things that we have to at some point figure out. We've got schools, Salem, as an example, has how many schools in Salem?
They have 6 comprehensive high schools, and they
6.
have an alternative school that has probably about 13 different programs.
Yeah, so they have 7 schools up there. All 7 schools are on the same schedule, so that all of their kids can take courses at all those places. We have two schools that are really involved. We have a 3rd high school, but you know, as far as when we're looking at, and we can't seem to figure out how to get us on the same schedule.
Chair Butzner, if I
think
can
that's
add.
problematic.
When Dr. Mills was here and was the interim superintendent for a year, one of the initial things he did was to have a superintendent's advisory committee for CTE. It included administrators from each high school. It included CTE teachers from each high school. It included students, board members, and community members. And a topic of conversation at that committee, more than once, but I vividly remember the beginning, because it was the beginning of my tenure here in GAPS, was around class offerings, was around what really robust CTE programs look like, and the expansion of pathways at each of the schools, so that students could access either pathway, knowing that a CTE pathway has to be a sequence of 3 courses. And so the topic of a high school schedule and being on the same schedule was brought up multiple times in a topic of conversation, certainly with Dr. Mills and when he was here, and certainly with that committee.
I was a board member on that committee, and I totally agree. I can totally, the discussion was blunt and straightforward. And I also, as a parent, I remember a meeting, sitting out there, is when I first heard of the idea, and that was a long time ago. How much does, this may be nitpicking a little bit, but how much does intra-district transfers change because living next to West, I see driving by around graduation time, a lot of South Albany, our 2021 South Albany graduate who lives blocks from West. And I think it's vice versa. And I don't know if that's too finely picking the statistics, but I don't know if that adds to the discrepancy of those two schools, even beyond the boundaries that you showed.
Right.
I think there are programs that add to that.
One of the things that a common schedule allows is for a student to be able to access a specific course of interest, a specific CTE pathway, and not have to transfer, right? So if I am interested in one of the CTE pathways at South, I can participate in that pathway and still go and attend my home high school, which could be West, and vice versa. And so I think one of the things it does is it increases access for students and allows them still to be part of their home high school while accessing something that might not be available, instead of forcing the student to choose between accessing a program and a transfer. And the reason that's important are because transfers in general are not a very equitable policy, because who is available for a transfer? Only students who can provide their own transportation. And we know that socioeconomically, that is a factor. So in general, who has transfers more available to them? Those obviously that can provide transportation, and typically those tend to go one way. And so having a system where you have access and transportation provided is a way that students can access CTE pathways, AP courses, and still be part of their home high school.
And I don't think anybody is discounting. We've heard from many the concern about losing a class period, and it's a legitimate concern. And I think it's one of those things that, as we're going through and reassessing long term, what that looks like is important. We also, I know, have heard from a lot of students that transferred to a specific school to be able to take courses, and that's why they're there and why they don't want to lose a class, right? And so that's the whole point, is that we don't want to have people having to, transfer to one school or the other because there's what they feel like better or more opportunities at one or another of schools. So, yeah. Go ahead, Director Aganaga.
So I know we've talked about transfers pre-COVID, when we could actually talk about building school stuff. And, I think Assistant Superintendent Harlan said the average is like 3% of what your district usually lets transfer to another school. And we were like really high at 11 or 15%. It was like very, very high. And I'm ashamed living in South Albany and seeing a lot of West Albany graduate signs just in my neighborhood. And I know there's circumstances of, dual parenting, things like that. But there's a lot of Westies over by Clover Ridge, Timber Ridge. And I think that would kind of get rid of that divide. And I think that adds to a lot of the aminosity that we see of like, I don't want to go to this school because I believe this one is better. I also had a question, because we already know a student can come over for CTEC or language arts. What if you take Spanish and you at one school and you don't do good, and you're like, man, I really need to do good in Spanish. Can you go to the other school and say, hey, I want to take Spanish with Mrs. Green instead of Mrs. Blue, or I want to retake Algebra 3, but maybe I'll try a different, professor, instructor?
Well, ideally, eventually you would be able to get to that point, certainly not where we
Okay.
are right now. So, and part of that is just kind of instructor shopping that we tend to discourage, because we'd rather, improve the relationship and the learning relationship between student and teacher. However, eventually, it may be that your Spanish 2 class is taught only 3rd period at your home school, but is taught 5th period at the other school, and you can
Yeah.
access it without losing band. So that type of a conflict. So yeah, eventually that's what we'd like to see. We, with forecasting this time, we didn't do as slick a job with forecasting initially as we could have, so we only listed CTE courses. I wasn't explicit with the principals around make sure you offer world languages, make sure you offer those other courses. And so what we've been relying on up until this date is really, if you know you can access a class in another school and you know who to ask, then you might be able to take that class at another school. But for a lot of our family, a lot of our kids, they don't know who to talk to or know that they have that option. And so that was kind of our first big step this year, was trying to get that to happen. I think one of the things you mentioned with seeing yard signs in different neighborhoods, right, of different schools, is I was really surprised by the feedback that we had from South with the number of AP and advanced course offerings that were offered, the diversity of course offerings that were offered at West. And conversely, the feedback that we got from West, more interesting culturally advanced courses offered at South that aren't offered at West. And so we're really missing opportunities for kids to be able to strengthen themselves through access courses at each of the schools. And I appreciated that the kids themselves pointed that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
To make stronger data, I think we need stronger results. I was a little disappointed, I'm sure you were too.
Oh, yeah.
Disappointed by the turnout of surveys, and I'm sure we'll set that for a goal for next year as well.
Yeah.
And then the thing I was a little nervous about was people not getting their communication, and you brought that up too. We have to, panic runs like wildfire in this town, and communication is definitely an important thing.
Yeah.
From us all the way down to, every single employee. So maybe that's something we can build together. But those are my questions for now. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And I will agree. I think of all of the students that I had heard from or talked to and asked questions of, the biggest thing that they've learned through this process is what is actually offered at both schools. A lot of the kids didn't even know what
Right.
opportunities were there, what they were missing out on, what they could potentially take somewhere else. And we've heard from a lot of kids that some took advantage of those, having known them, and others were like, gosh, I would have done that, or I wish I'd known I'm going to be a senior, and I didn't know I had the opportunity of been taking those classes since the time I was a freshman. That would have been nice, So again, as much communication as is necessary, obviously that's something that's important with our students too, and focusing on those.
And
high
even
school offerings.
as we asked students, so as I sent out that survey with as many of the classes that we could cross-reference didn't appear to be offered at each school, there are entire programs that were left off of the list just through the speed of doing that. So so I'm just saying, they're still not even aware
Of all of
what
them,
is taught
yeah.
at each school that isn't necessarily taught at one. So
Yeah.
and there was a lot of confusion with that survey, kids being concerned that they were actually registering for their courses. So once we clarified for them, no, we just wanted to basically see what their interests were. It was more of an interest survey. If courses were offered, would they want to take those courses?
And just another interesting point, in terms of district alignment and what it looks like for course offerings, every course that's offered in any district has to be coded by the state because you have to report the minutes and everything else. Our course catalogs don't even title nor code their courses in the same way at each high school. So it literally is having to go course by course. So we have a long way to go in terms of articulation and alignment amongst levels, specifically at the secondary level. And then, the second point would be, and I really think to Esperanza and LJ this year and some of the things that they have shared. When I hear, and I know I've experienced it, I have a high schooler right now myself, the idea that I'm not even sure really what's offered or kind of what does this look like or how does this impact me? And then I see the survey data that says 37% of their high school students feel supported by their school. It tells me that we have a ways to go in terms of supporting and amplifying student voice, specifically at the high school level, to say, what is available to you? How do we empower you to make choices and make your voice heard, not only within your own school, but certainly at the district level as well? So when I put that data together in that way, it tells me that access for students and opportunities for their voice are really important.
And I want to take a moment to really thank Esperanza and LJ for that, because they have done such a phenomenal job of reaching out to their school communities. And I know they're hearing from kids that aren't the people they normally hear from, right? It's not just a circle of friends or that sort of thing. They're getting a lot of feedback. And bringing that feedback forward, sometimes it's not easy information to share with us. It's not pleasant information to hear always, but it's so important. And very often, it's helped them to understand their school community a little better and what types of things they need to bring to the table. And we couldn't do the work without that kind of involvement. And it's been really, really helpful. And I know it's been a lot of work for you guys because you have school all day and everything else. And then they're getting a lot of information to bring to us as well. So it's like having a second job or third. But we do appreciate it. It's been very helpful.
And I would tell you, it leads to real change. So there are two very specific instances that I can think of. One is the summer program offerings. And vividly remember Esperanza saying, yeah, that sounds great, but we move and kind of follow kind of the farm work in the summer. And so I'm not going to be able to and it caused us to think differently about how we offered those summer camps. So we have some summer camps that are months at a time, some that are a week at a time, and you can sign up for different ones so that when students are here, they can access what they have. That comment led directly to that thinking. And then LJ, a comment that you made around, my friends of color, when there are issues at school, come to me to say kind of what should I do? Because the adults don't realize that a Black student is not going to go to a counselor who doesn't understand what it means to be Black in this environment. That has resonated with me. So we have been hiring elementary counselors, really looking specifically at what is the population or demographic of a school and how do we make sure that kids have access to that mental health support. That reminder for me and the team really caused them to be pretty perseverant in ways that we might not have otherwise. And so far, out of our hires, we have 2 bilingual, bicultural counselors at elementary. The hiring we still have to do really diligently and stubbornly around how do we make sure kids have access that they'll use. So not only is it helpful and not only is it great to hear from students, but I want you and Esperanza to know that the things that you've done and the vulnerability that you've showed have caused real change for your classmates and certainly for kids who will come after you. So thank you.
For sure. All right. Nothing else for your superintendent
Nope,
report?
I'm gonna turn off the power from behind me now.
Okay. Both of them are just.
Power shut down. I think I got it. There you go.
So I just want to run into, and are there any board member reports? There is a board liaison report there. Again, this is the committee or organization, the staff members and board members assigned to those. Obviously, with 3 board members leaving after the end of the month, this will be something that we'll need to bring forward and reassign to the 3 new board members as well. A lot of these committees and groups have not necessarily been meeting too often, so I don't know if there's much in the way of reports. If there's none for the committees or board liaison reports, are there any other regular board report information pieces? Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's my last board member report. So, and for once, I'm not going to steal LJ's thunder by reporting about the great things happening at West. But I have been waxing a little nostalgic and reflective. I was going to talk about, just some of the highlights of the last 4 years, but you covered a lot of them in your presentation. No, it's good, but the bond work was huge. The strategic planning effort that we really only just got to kick off was enormous, and I'm just so excited to see that bear fruit and to grow. There's been a lot of talk of the equity work, but I wanted to share, we all got it, but in case you haven't gotten to see it, there was this letter that came to us that I think is pretty paralleled because it was signed by all of our elementary school teachers. And I just think it speaks to the equity work that we've been so,
Administrators.
Administrators,
By the principals?
principals.
what did I say?
Teachers.
Sorry, the principals.
Yeah.
Thank you. So it reads, Dear board members of the Greater Albany Public School District, we want to welcome the new members of the Greater Albany School Board and thank both new and returning members for your engagement and commitment to the work of educating all students in the Greater Albany area. Superintendent Goff and school board members have been courageous advocates for students and their families, and we are excited to continue moving forward with this important work. As building leaders, we feel incredibly supported by Superintendent Goff. We rely on her to stay informed and to communicate promptly and clearly. This keeps us all aligned and provides us with critical information we need to support staff and students to the best of our abilities. When decisions need to be made, we can count on Superintendent Goff to be transparent and to center the needs of all students at all times. This level of trust and vulnerability is incredibly difficult to find in a leader. It is. We do not know what changes we will navigate next year, but change is inevitable, and we trust in and depend upon the strong leadership of Melissa Goff to guide us. Delivering an educational equity requires a focus on what each child needs, deep commitment, and courage to change systems. Equity means understanding who our kids are and how to meet their needs. In order to reach equitable outcomes, different paths must be created for each student. For example, students with disabilities, students of color, students who speak languages other than English, LGBTQ2 SIA plus students, students from poverty, and students with trauma, to name just a few, all need different types of support. These students have incredible potential, and our community is stronger when all children have access to a high-quality and equitable education. We want to educate all students, and together with Superintendent Goff and the school board, we can continue to improve our school system and serve our community. Your job is not an easy one, but we are confident that with the proven leadership of Superintendent Goff and the addition of Javier Cervantes, our new Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, we will continue to move this challenging work forward. We welcome Director Cervantes. He is a lighthouse for this work, and he shines a light on our efforts. Having been a member of our community for decades, he offers an additional valuable perspective. Together, the focus on equity will necessitate all of us to reflect inward, open our hearts and minds, and listen in order to understand others. Sometimes the understanding we gain leads us to make difficult decisions that require both courage and clear communication. As elementary principals in the Greater Albany Public School District, we are proud to work in a district led by a superintendent and school board that recognizes and advocates for all learners. Our ultimate goal is to make Albany a safe and welcoming place for all our children to learn and grow. We honor you for championing this work, and we look forward to our partnership as we continue to make a difference in the lives of all of our students. Respectfully submitted in support of Superintendent Melissa Goff, our leader and advocate for social justice, signed by Marisa Beltran of South Shore, Julia Bradley of Central Tequina, Shanda Brown of Oak, Melanie Kasperiewicz of Waverly, Christy Gill of Meadow Ridge, Ann Griffith of Oak Grove, Kimberly Jordan of Sunrise, Gretchen Rayburn of Tangent, Chandra Smith at Periwinkle, Kylie Sawa at North Albany, Alyssa Stevens at Lafayette, and Sue Turner at Meadow Ridge. I just think it's extraordinary. We've never received anything like that in the 4 years I've been here, so I just wanted to share that in case you haven't gotten a chance to read it. And then lastly, I'll say, Vice Chair Thompson, I think you had an opportunity to volunteer at the Cooling Center this weekend. I think you were there on Sunday. I was there on Saturday. And I just reflected back on how the last year, we have kept moving forward with educating our students, even in this pandemic, but we have continued to be what our community has needed us to be beyond that. We have gotten food to our students and to their families when they needed food. And when vaccines became available, we made our schools available to give vaccines. And when heat wave strikes, we open up our schools so that our families can come there to cool off. I just think it's so important to realize what a foundation and a bedrock of our community, our schools, and our school district has been. And it's been I'm just so proud to have been part of it.
Any other board member updates? LJ, you're up.
Perfect. All right, I'd just like to start off by saying thank you to Superintendent Goff, Assistant Superintendent Harlan, and my principal, Mrs. Orsmorn, for the opportunity at this position and the opportunity to be involved in some tough conversations that have started this year. And although it is fun to talk about the important things that my school has done and accomplished, the uncomfortable conversations were what I would really appreciate and look back on from this year, because it's my job that the students' voices are heard, and I know that Superintendent Goff will make sure that they will continue to be heard in years come. I hope that things like student forums will continue. Superintendent Goff has done a fantastic job with those and putting the students first, and I thank her for that. But that can only come with students stepping up for themselves, which I've seen, and I hope to continue to see that they will continue to bring up the problems and questions they have, and that students will continue to work for what they want, because Superintendent Goff and the school board, they are listening, and I can promise that. And this year, we have started many difficult conversations around equity in schools, which I've really appreciated. And I would hate for all the progress that we made this year to just be thrown away. And this year was really just a beginning and like a step towards the right direction. And in a few years, I hope to look back on this district and see how far it's come with equity and diversity in our schools. And it really takes a whole community. And I know that Superintendent Goff and Assistant Superintendent Harlan take a lot of pride in defeating racial problems in our schools. And I hope that future school board members and school board representatives will follow their lead. And I hope that students of color and those parents of the students will continue to bring up their problems, because racism doesn't belong in our world, and it definitely doesn't belong in our schools. So once again, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to get my voice heard and other students' voices heard. I'm very grateful. So thank you.
And no other updates from West? School is done, graduation was wonderful.
Yes.
Do we have Esperanza?
We do.
Yay! Excellent. Well, welcome, Esperanza. Can you hear us?
There. Now she's big.
Oh my goodness, you're outside.
Hang gliding.
Hopefully she's not roasting.
Oh,
Hi there.
unmute at the bottom on the left. Nope, I think Rob
Whoops.
has the,
Did we get it? Far left.
all the way.
We've muted you.
Oh, there.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Esperanza, can you hear us? Yay!
Yes, you guys.
Welcome. Well, we've been singing your praises, you and LJ, for your
I've been listening.
Oh, good,
I've
good.
been at the live, yeah.
Good. Well, why don't you go ahead and give us an update from your end?
Nothing really. I think everyone was just ready to be done with school, and I haven't really gotten many messages other than just looking into how the next year is going to look like. But it seems like you've answered most of those questions, which we are very thankful for, and I'm very glad you got the rundown about how everything's going. And congratulations to all those who are going to be leaving the school board. A lot of us are very sad, but very thankful for everything that you've done in the past years that you've been on it.
Oh.
That's about it.
No crying. You did that at graduation too. Thank you.
Yeah, Miss Butts there had to console me after the soft graduation.
It's
So I'm
all-
very happy for all those who graduated and everything that they're going to be going into.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we miss
those-
you here tonight.
Yes, we wish you were here in person. It looks like, okay, now I can see. You are in a 4th of July tent.
Yes.
Ah, good for you. Well, we appreciate you joining us and all the work this year, and we are very excited that you get to remain as part of our board going forward, and those of us leaving will miss you as well. But I will at least still see you, I'm sure, as you go through your senior year this year, which is great. So, did anybody else have anything they wanted to say?
No, just have a safe summer, and we'll be excited to see you when it starts back up.
And get your rest, because when you get back, you're just right back at it. We'll expect the same or more out of you.
All right, thank you for having me, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night.
You too. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Bye.
Oh my gosh, it's got to be hot. Sitting outside in a tent all day.
I think it's cooling down this evening.
I hope so, yeah. Well, thank you again, LJ, for your
Thank you.
comments too. Appreciate it. Okay. Sorry, I lost my screen here. Okay. So moving from board reports, we're to our consent agenda. We have personnel with a personnel report for classified staff and administrators, and then we have our board minutes from the last couple of board meetings, the 27th of May and the 7th and 21st of June. Were there any comments or questions from board members? Okay, so our consent agenda passes. And that brings us to our old business, and I will pull this up here, which is board policies, AB, and Melissa and Vice Chair Thompson.
So I will get us started, and then Vice Chair Thompson, feel free to jump in. So board members, as we discussed, when these board policies were first presented to you, these are sections A and B. So these are the second and third complete sections of the board policy book that you would be approving tonight. Remember section J, which is all things students related. You approved at our last meeting. That section is really worth 4 of these sections, so these are relatively small. These sections cover the responsibilities of the board and the responsibilities of the superintendent.
Perfect, nothing to add.
The edits to these school board policies, just to provide maybe additional information. These are recommendations that come from the Oregon School Boards Association. This is part of the scheduled OSBA rewrite of our board policy handbook. The Oregon School Boards Association recommends policies to all 197 school districts across the state of Oregon. You can contract with them to provide the policy rewrite leadership. They then facilitate you through a policy rewrite process. Our policy rewrite process includes a representative from the school board, myself, or another representative if I'm unable to attend. We have 3 parents and a community member as well. 2 of those participants also happen to serve on the ESD Board of Directors, so we are well represented both in educational background but also in experiences across the system. When board policies are specific to certain student populations, we then bring in specialists from those student populations to provide us feedback.
Also, a reminder, there are 11 sections to school board policies, and so this is a multi-year process.
Yeah.
We're only one
I
section
just want to
down.
add, in all this discussion, it's certainly led by Spencer Lewis. He certainly come from OSBA, has all that background, can tell you about, how this policy has come from the legislature and all that. But the reason why it takes so long with all those stakeholders, we do get a chance to offer our perspectives and put our input in many places. So I think in some of the discussion about this, yes, we lean heavily on OSBA, no doubt about it, as we should. But it's taking so long because we do, at the end of the day, put our stamp on it.
Correct.
Well, and you've been at it quite a while, didn't?
Yeah, early, was the first meeting end of January?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Yeah,
it's been a massive undertaking, and I know some of the people from the community that are serving on it, and
Yeah.
I'm just really grateful because when we considered doing this, I was like, oh my gosh, like overhaul. Yeah, so thanks.
And you can see on some of these dates that some of these policies have not even been looked at.
For a long
in-
time.
Yeah,
15, 20 years.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there you go.
And I believe it was part of our strategic planning initially anyway, was one of our very early on work sessions with OSBA when we started looking at some of the policies and had questions because they were so outdated and we're trying to get updated information. And I know along the way, Assistant Superintendent Harlan was bringing some to us, one-off as much as we could. But it seemed like it was in our best interest to do a more thorough review and undertaking based on OSBA's recommendation of just how many were out of date and missing, to be honest, missing legal information, even legal updates that we needed to make, so.
It was also one of the outgoing recommendations from Dr. Mills as well.
Right.
Because he had gone through this process and knew that our policies were outdated.
So are there board member questions? So again, this came to us previously. We had it for several weeks before we saw it as new business. We saw it as new business. We had additional few weeks to ask questions and provide comments. Were there any additional discussion points or questions?
Maybe just a comment that I kind of wish we would do a work session just on these policies before the board meeting, so we can kind of talk some of them out. I know we can always send questions, but sometimes translation gets lost in email and, but yeah, I wish we would have, maybe it's just a lesson learned that, hey, let's do a work session and then do the vote.
Any other? Nothing? Okay. So at this point, we will entertain a motion.
I move to approve policies A and B as presented.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the table to approve policies A, B as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. And that brings us to our bond business. We have a monthly bond report, and Mr. Buttram, are you taking this one? Or is
Nope.
David joining us?
David will be joining us here in a moment.
Yay! Two people from. Are we on? Mr. McKay, can you hear us? Except for you're on mute.
It'll usually take just a second for him to get his audio set up.
There you go. Yay! Welcome.
Aw.
Bond business. A monthly bond report, and Mr. Buttram, are you taking this one? Or is David joining us?
David, you gotta close your YouTube.
Two people from.
Yeah, close your live feed.
Can everyone hear me?
Can you hear us?
When you call it
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Except you're on mute.
Could you close your live feed, David?
There you go. Yay! Welcome.
Thank you.
I love this.
Close your live feed.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Could you close your live feed, David?
There.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. I guess it was on my end. I'm sorry.
It's all
Okay,
good.
we were loving hearing ourselves 3 and 4 times over. That was interesting.
Like deja vu again.
Welcome.
Hi, David. We have you on early tonight.
Hello. Chair Butzner, members of the board, I will make my report brief tonight for the sake of your meeting. First, West Albany High School, we are that task that you've heard me say over and over and over again. We are in closeout, and all the major projects you have heard us say this, and we have been working diligently with the contractor, the design team, to prepare for commissioning. We're still not there, but we continue to work, having the weekly meetings, working through issues that have been found, primarily in the mechanical system, working with them to find resolution so that we can have a building that is gone through the commissioning process. That's that independent third-party review to confirm that the system is functioning and performing properly. The goal of the team, the entire team, HMK, GAPS, DLR, and Girding Builders, is that would occur before students and teachers return in August. It's unfortunately is a monumental task, but we just continue to work hard on that. As I've reported through the months. I think this is the 47th end-of-month report we have assembled for the district. And I know you remember me mentioning that closeout process and how important it is for Oak Grove, Meadow Ridge, and South. And so the same is true for West, and we just continue to work on that. The other is we have basically 3 CFU projects this year, this summer. We have fire alarms, we have fire doors, and we have flooring. So those 3 projects have projects at 13 sites. So again, trying to group projects together to achieve economies of scale. Those projects are all underway. We're seeing no setbacks or any concerns right now. Budgets seem very strong, and so we are anticipating being able to complete those projects this summer within the budget or less than the budget. And that, as I heard mentioned earlier in the meeting, our end-of-month report is getting shorter. It's only 57 pages, which is signs that the bond is coming to an end and the project's going to plan. And so, any questions for the report?
Looking around the room, I don't see any.
David, as you may or may not know, 3 of us are cycling off the board tonight. And I'm just really glad that you were here. It wouldn't feel like a final school board meeting without you, especially, coming up on 10 o'clock. So, thank you for all that you've done over these last 4 years. To be at closeout with West is just very fitting, and it's just been a wonderful ride. Thank you.
And I wanted to just thank Kim and Jennifer and Justin for your support and asking the tough questions, through this process, making sure that we're staying on task. It's been great working with you. And good luck in your new adventures.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. And we're letting,
I have one more thing I do want to mention. I meant to mention this earlier. We have assembled a PowerPoint presentation, what I call promises made, promises kept, that we're beginning to go out to the different organizations. I've spoken at one Rotary, one Kiwanis. I have another Rotary scheduled in July. If they're reached out to the chamber, I think it's important that we go back and kind of do a report to those community groups that supported the bond, and to be able to report the great work that has been accomplished. If you know of any of those groups, please pass those through to Melissa, and I'll make sure I get scheduled to be able to give them a presentation of, again, the great work that's been accomplished over the last 4 years.
thank you. That will be an interesting report for sure. It's been a lot. Well, we will be able to release you before 10
Thank you.
as one of my last public things to do. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Night, David. I don't know if our incoming board members have had an opportunity to see a report, but it might be nice to have David do something collectively informational just about everything that has been done, but also what's still left to do, and what types of things are in process right now that we know are happening. I don't know if that's been planned or scheduled, but that'd be great for him to do too.
Great idea.
So,
Some
yeah.
lessons learned.
That too. We've had a lot of those for sure. So, perfect. All right. That moves us into our new business, and we have Director Buttram, yes, for,
And Director Netzel should be joining us here shortly. I
Oh.
saw her in the waiting room. And now the whole waiting room is gone. There
there she is. Let's see if we get to hear ourselves again.
I'll say this now before it starts to echo. If you haven't already, please turn off your live stream from YouTube or Facebook.
Can you hear us okay? And Ashley, we can hear you now, so.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the agenda item that I have to talk about is the appropriation transfers. So, Chair Buxman, members of the board, each year the school board adopts a budget and makes the appropriations. Since the budget is a plan based on estimates, there's always the potential to either overspend or underspend in any of the adopted budget appropriation categories. At any time before the end of the fiscal year, the board is allowed by resolution to transfer appropriations within a fund when it appears that the total appropriation will be exceeded. For the 2021 fiscal year, there are 4 funds in which I'm asking the board to approve an appropriation transfer for. They're the general fund, the grants fund, special revenue funds, and capital projects fund. So in the general fund, we're asking to move authority from instruction to both support services and community services in anticipation of additional year-end expenditures that may cause them to exceed their budgeted appropriation authority. We have plenty of room in the instruction appropriation to do that. For the grants funds, they're a little more complicated this year due to the district receiving some grants that we had not anticipated. Those grants ended up having a significant impact on both our instruction and community services budget appropriations. The transfer we are requesting covers expenditures in those areas that have already occurred, as well as provides for any additional expenditures occurring during the month of June, such as those for the Think Big Summer grants. In the special revenue funds, for the 2021 fiscal year, ESSER was appropriated as a special revenue fund. At the time we created the budget, we knew we would be receiving ESSER dollars and had created the budget based on how we anticipated it would be spent. We ended up spending more for community services due to our purchases of equipment to support our meal distribution efforts during COVID, as well as our implementation of learning pods. So this transfer would cover those expenditures. And then the last one in the capital projects funds is due to when we built the budget for the transportation facility. The expenditures were initially budgeted in facilities acquisition and construction. It was later determined that those expenditures needed to be coded to the transportation function, which is part of support services. So that transfer moves the spending authority from the facilities acquisition to support services. So do you guys have any questions?
Any questions from the board?
This is new business. Are we looking for this to be done tonight?
Yes, it has to be done tonight because it needs to be done before the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
So we'd look for you to make a motion to approve the appropriation transfers as presented.
Okay, any board questions? I'm looking around the room. I am not seeing any.
I move to approve the 2020-2021 appropriation transfers as presented.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the table to approve the 2020-2021 appropriation transfers as presented. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we have,
Up next, Madam Chair,
Yes.
is Jim Scherzinger. He's going to walk us through the changes to the budget.
okay.
Jim, you had unmuted and then you muted again. So if you unmute, you've got the floor.
Are you ready? Okay.
Yep.
So I'm here, I have a memo, 3-page memo that briefly describes the changes to the approved budget that are in the adopted budget that's before you tonight for next year. There are really 4 reasons for the changes. The first one was the legislature approved a higher level of state school funding that was assumed in the approved budget, and also the estimate of SIA funding has increased. The second was the projected beginning balance, or the ending balance from last year, the beginning balance for next year has increased. The third is that the recently approved labor agreement costs more than was the funding that was included in the approved budget. And then finally, the staff has developed much greater clarity on how the spending of temporary COVID transition funds would be spent. So that's included in here that was not in the approved budget. The rest of the memo goes through and explains the changes. First, on the grant funds, the largest change by far is a $6 million increase from ESSER funds to fund elementary school additions. This is really this was the reason that Russ talked earlier this evening about that we had to have a budget hearing. This single appropriation alone. The law requires that if there is a more than 10% increase in expenditures from the approved budget in a particular fund, from the approved budget to the adopted budget, you have to have another budget hearing, and that's why you had that. And it was for this expenditure increase. To qualify under ESSER, this work needs to occur as soon as possible. This is capital outlay, the time periods for planning it, and the approval process that we have to go through with the state to get approval for this means that we really need to put the budget authority into this budget. And as I said, the ESSER capital spending projects have to go through an approval process by the state. The other things in the grant funds, and by the way, there's a list of all of those changes on the second page. You might just want to go to that now. The first one was the $6 million for the elementary school additions. Then there's $70,000 in there for the labor agreement. These are for the staff that are funded out of grant funds. There's a similar, actually, increase in the general fund and in other funds where we have staff, but they were typically either absorbed in the budget or in the general fund. You'll see it listed. Then there are 2 positions. These are in SIA, funded by the increase in SIA funding. Half-time positions for a library coordinator and a BEPTOSA. And then the rest of those expenditures are increases in ESSER, where we have a better idea of how they want to spend the ESSER funding. So we put it in the budget. When we did the approved budget, we put money, and there still is money in there, that's flexible funding. That was put in there without a specific purpose, because these are the kinds of funds where we need them available. These are temporary funds. They need to be spent on the intended purpose for them, and we needed to have budget authority. So what we did was, in these other ones, as we moved money there, we reduced the flexible funding. And you see that under the $771,000 decrease. So the subtotal there is $6 million, which, as you can see, is primarily the elementary school addition, is the main new authority here. Then the contingency was reduced by 2.5, and so the total change in appropriations was $3.5 million. These are grant funds. In the general fund, the labor labor agreement cost $535,000. The school allocations, these are the allocations that go out to individual schools, to principals, for them to choose how to spend. And typically, well, those are made by a formula, and we ran the normal formula, and that normal formula was in the approved budget. With these allocations, the rule in the past has been that if you don't spend all your allocation, you can carry over up to 20% of the allocation from that prior year into the next year. Well, this year, the underspending of the allocations was much greater than normal because of COVID. And so most of the schools are going to spend, are going to be eligible for the 20% carryover. And there wasn't enough money in the approved budget to cover that. So again, we got more money in the ending balance because they didn't spend it. And so we're now increasing the school allocation in the budget enough to cover the 20% carryover and to leave some additional funds on application if there's a particular need for a particular school. It can be approved by staff, by the leadership. There are also 2 positions, a communications assistant and a comprehensive health administrator, an excavator and a tractor for $90,000, and fencing at Oak. A total increase in appropriations in the general fund of about $1 million. There's actually about a $3 million increase in revenue. So about $2 million is going into reserves. So the reserves are going up from $8 to $10 million. And those are the changes.
Thank you, Jim. I know we had a couple.
I think the rest of that I've already sort of talked about in the notes. It's just for completion there. So those are the changes in the proposed adopted budget that's before you.
Thank you, Jim. I know we have a couple questions here, so Director Aganaga, I saw your hand up at one point.
Ms. Harlan, a BEPTOSA?
Yeah, a bilingual education program.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I need to get the sound up here. Okay, I'm sorry, could you ask that question again?
I got it, Jim.
Oh, okay, I just couldn't hear it, okay, all right.
Were there other questions from any of the board members?
That's not so much a question. I asked Russ earlier, just highlighting one opportunity this is with the, and great work, whoever made the case to the federal government for these elementary school additions. $6 million. I asked Russ, how much is in our construction excise tax fund, which we usually go to build things that aren't part of a bond?
So the answer to your question, Vice Chair Thompson, is about $4.5 million in there. $2.5 million of that is earmarked for the transportation facility. And we add the only reason we have a balance that's that healthy in that fund right now is we've been so focused on bond spending, it's accrued over several years.
Yeah.
Normally that fund only receives about $800,000 a year on average.
Yeah.
It varies with construction.
And the credit for the waiver and the work with the state around those additions goes to Director Buttram. So he did a great
Outstanding.
job, and his staff.
Great job, yeah.
It complicates the budget authorization a little bit, but it was a heck of
Sure.
an
No,
opportunity.
it's-
Right,
it's a-
for sure, thank you.
Quite an
for
opportunity.
that. Excellent job. Okay, so again, you're looking for the motions tonight because again, it needs to be done.
It does,
Before the end of
and
the
one,
month.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but one point to clarify too is, for the incoming board members, these are authorizations that are put in the budget. Each of the projects that are laid out here come before the board again as a presentation for approval.
Correct. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
For 4
So there's
separate
4
motions?
separate motions, yes, for this one.
I'll go ahead and start one.
Okay,
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution adopting the budget for 2021-2022.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table to approve the resolution adopting the budget for 2021-2022 year. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? That passes unanimously.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the resolution making appropriations.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the resolution making appropriations. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? That is approved unanimously.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the resolution imposing and categorizing taxes.
Thank you. There's a motion on the table to approve the resolution imposing and categorizing taxes. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? That also passes unanimously.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to authorize the assignment of fund balances.
And thank you. We have a motion on the table to authorize the assignment of fund balances. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That one also passes unanimously. Boy, you guys each did one. Nice work. You are good to go. Jim, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Thank you, Jim Scherzinger, for your amazing service to us.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Thank you for all of your work.
Yes.
And Ashley,
Ashley, too.
it's all yours, babe. All yours now.
She's like, woohoo.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
All right, so we are on to, I think, our final order of new business, Director Larry.
Chair Butzner, members of the board, thank you. I bring before you tonight two labor contracts, labor agreements that have been ratified by each association, but it wouldn't be right if I didn't at least make a couple of comments about this process and how valuable our employees are to us. This is a people business. The budget that you just approved, I believe, contains something like 90% of the cost for our employees. And it is our employees who directly serve the students in our schools. And most of our employees are represented by either the Greater Albany Education Association for our licensed employees or the Greater Albany Association of Classified Employees for our non-licensed employees. And the leadership and the rank and file and the bargaining teams from these associations come to the table to work with us with the expressed goal of meeting our interests and matching their interests, and also with the expressed goal of settling this contract and moving forward so that we can better serve the students of our community. And so I want to thank and congratulate the leadership of each of the associations, Lindsay Jansen Hofstetler, that was a tough one, and Helen Jacobs. They both lead their associations and their bargaining teams very effectively. That said, we bring before you these two contracts. They've both been ratified by the associations, and I would recommend ratification by the board tonight. And so there are two separate motions there, one for each association.
Go ahead, Director Roach.
So I've said this before, but in 2005, Director Larry made one of his worst decisions, which was hiring me. But I went on later that year to serve on the GAEA Executive Board. To say it was one of the biggest honors of my time with the district. And I work with a lot of school districts in my day job through OSU and in teacher preparation. And regularly I hear about districts that are struggling with their associations, that there's clashes between the board or the district leadership and the association leadership. I have just been in awe since 2005, since I started here, about the leadership with both associations, former Superintendent Maria Delapore's work, Director Larry's work on really collaboration and relationships first, and kids first. And I think it's incredible, and the work that you've all done as a team. I've mentioned to several up here that because I am married to a member of the certified bargaining body, that I will be abstaining from the certified contract ratification vote. And so I'll do that, but I will be voting on the classified one.
Were there other board questions? I know we've seen this a little bit before, but nothing? Okay. We will entertain motions here as well.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the certified settlement agreement as presented by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table to approve the certified settlement agreement as presented. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? None, and we have one abstaining.
One abstention.
Thank you, that passes.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the classified settlement agreement as presented.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table to approve the classified settlement agreement as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, and that passes unanimously.
Usually a round of applause.
Great
for
work.
the
I know.
Union agreements.
Thank you for everyone that was involved in that process. It's always a lengthy one and an important one, and this year we had both at the same time, so.
And Director Larry, I'm not going to be putting you in my recycling bin. I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for your years of service.
Yes.
And just wish you happy retirement and lots of wonderful things.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your many years of service. Will you get to go see LJ in Hawaii? Are you vacationing in Hawaii?
We're all going to go see LJ in Hawaii.
Right? I think we will.
I'll look for him.
We're all going to try while he's there. We'll find him out surfing, I'm sure.
Real board retreat.
Right? All right. Under other business, I don't believe we had anything, information only. As a reminder, there is a special board meeting on July 1st, which I believe is to do our swearing-in ceremony for our 3 new board members and maybe a few other agenda items. I was not on that planning session. And then we have, there will be a July 12th regular board meeting at 7, and then August 9th, August 23rd, September 13th, and September 27th, scheduled to date. Of course, always subject to change, especially when we have a new board getting together. So if those dates work for them, they'll continue to have them. If not, they'll be updated. All right, this is my last chance. We are adjourned. 10:04 p.m.
That's actually not bad. Not bad.
No.